The night was quiet around the outer station in orbit above the silent green moon, but the silence broke when alarms rang through the metal halls and red lights washed across the cold walls. The sound echoed like thunder inside the ears of every being on duty, and all eyes turned toward the landing bay. A shuttle was coming in, its hull scratched and burned from the chase, its engines coughing sparks as it landed on the trembling platform. The doors opened and smoke poured out, and behind that smoke a group of armored guards stepped forward, dragging a heavy cage between them. The cage was wrapped in steel bars thick as a tree trunk, and inside something moved with violent power. The creature inside slammed against the bars with claws that carved sparks into metal. Its eyes glowed like fire in the shadows. Its mouth opened wide with teeth sharp as broken glass, and its growl shook the floor like a quake. Scientists and officers gathered around whispering in fear, and the commander raised one hand to silence them. A predator cub, alive, taken from the deep wild of the forbidden world. No one believed it was possible, for these predators were legends of death and darkness. Their adults were said to tear through armies. Their howls carried across valleys, and whole villages would vanish when one walked near. Yet here was a young one caught and trapped, a living myth behind steel. The guards shoved the cage forward into the research wing. Every step they took made the beast thrash harder. Chains rattled and bars bent as if they might snap, and every alien eye stared in dread. The scientists muttered about study and samples and dangerous tests, but the soldiers only wanted the cage sealed away forever, for they knew even a cub of this breed could kill without warning. The commander spoke with a hard voice, ordering the lab sealed, and the creature watched at all times. No one was to approach the bars, no one was to attempt contact, and all weapons were to be ready. He declared that this was not a prize, but a threat that could end them all. His words echoed like steel against steel, but still the younger scientists leaned close with hungry eyes, dreaming of data and glory. Inside the cage the cub roared and threw itself again and again at the metal, but then without warning it stopped. Its breathing slowed, its growl faded, and its eyes, bright and wild, shifted through the crowd until they locked on one man, Dr. Elias Ward, a human researcher with tired eyes and steady hands. He had stood in the back watching in silence, but now he felt his chest tighten as the creature stared straight at him as if it already knew him. The others did not notice at first. They were still arguing about methods and dangers, but Ward could not move. His breath caught as the cub's head tilted, its ears twitching, its body still for the first time since arrival, and the room slowly grew quiet as more eyes saw the strange calm. The predator no longer fought the bars, no longer raged. It only stared at the human with something almost unreadable, something between fire and memory. Ward felt the weight of that gaze, heavy and sharp, pressing into him as if the creature saw deeper than flesh. The air grew tense. Whispers spread. Some said the cub was planning its strike. Some said it was broken by fear, and others said nothing at all, for they did not want to believe what their eyes told them, that the predator was watching only him. The commander narrowed his eyes and barked an order to move the cage deeper into isolation. Guards obeyed, dragging it forward, but the cub pressed against the bars toward Ward, straining until its claws screeched across the steel, its eyes never leaving his face, and Ward felt his stomach twist with something he could not name. It was not fear, and it was not courage. It was something else entirely, something that made his hands shake and his mind race. The walls of the research bay rattled with the creature's weight. Chains pulled tight. Guards swore under their breath as sparks flew from the metal, and still Ward stood frozen, the sound of alarms fading behind the pounding in his ears. He wondered if the predator sensed something inside him, or if it was choosing him, and the thought chilled his blood more than any growl. As the cage vanished into the shadows of the deep lab, the last thing Ward saw before the heavy doors closed was the cub's eyes glowing in the dark, locked on him with a silent promise, a connection that no one else could see. But he felt it burn like fire under his skin, and he knew at that moment that his life had changed forever. And though the others thought the capture was the end of the hunt, Ward felt with every beat of his heart that it was only the beginning, and whatever bond had just formed would bring dangers none of them could imagine, dangers that waited in the silent stars beyond the station walls. The station never truly slept, yet after the capture the halls grew heavy with silence. The alarms were gone, but whispers filled the air. Whispers of fear, whispers of wonder, whispers of death to come. For the predator cub had shaken every soul who saw its eyes, and now behind sealed steel doors it waited, its presence pressing into every dream and thought. The research chamber was filled with bright lights and endless machines, tubes and screens humming like restless insects, and in the center stood the cage, iron bars wrapped in layers of reinforced alloy, energy fields humming around it in a faint blue glow. Guards stood ready with weapons raised, scientists circled like moths around flame, and all the while the cub sat in shadow, silent and watching. Hours passed, food trays slid into the cage were ignored, raw meat from unknown worlds left untouched, water dishes pushed inside spilled to the floor, and every test failed. The cub refused to eat, refused to drink, refused even to sleep. It only waited, eyes glowing, breath steady, muscles coiled like springs, as if it knew patience better than any of them, as if it had lived 1,000 lives inside that young body. The alien researchers argued in harsh tones. Some said sedate it and cut it open. Others said starve it until it obeyed. A few said to kill it now before it grew stronger. Yet none dared open the bars, for they saw how easily its claws cut steel, and they knew even chained it could tear them apart in seconds. Their voices rose, their fear growing louder, but through it all the cub ignored them. Then came Ward, quiet as a shadow, human among dozens of alien scholars, his steps soft against the cold floor, his eyes drawn again and again to the cage. He saw what others missed. The cub's eyes followed him. Its head turned slightly each time he moved. When others spoke, it looked away. But when Ward breathed, it seemed to breathe with him, a strange rhythm shared, silent and strong. The commander barked orders again, his voice iron. He warned that no one was to step closer. He spoke of danger, of rules, of death waiting in the dark. Yet still Ward felt a pull, a weight like a hand pressing against his chest, dragging him closer to the bars, and before he knew it his feet carried him forward, past the muttering scientists, past the wary guards, until he stood before the glowing blue field that separated man from beast. The cub rose to its feet, muscles rippling, claws scraping sparks across the floor. The guards shouted warnings, fingers tight on triggers, but Ward raised his hand and told them not to fire. His voice calm though his heart thundered. He took one step closer, and the cub did not strike. Instead it pressed its head against the bars, a slow movement, heavy with meaning, as if asking for something it could not speak. Gasps filled the room. Aliens whispered in disbelief. Some claimed trick, others claimed madness, but no one could deny what their eyes saw. The predator that had fought every touch, refused every offering, now pressed against the bars like a child against a window, its breath steaming against the alloy, its eyes fixed on the human alone. Ward lifted his hand slowly, carefully, as though moving through thick water, and he pressed his palm against the barrier of energy that separated him from the beast. A faint shimmer ran across the field. The cub leaned closer, nose nearly touching his skin. A low sound rumbled from its throat, not a growl of rage, but a soft sound almost like a purr carried on thunder. The commander shouted again, demanding Ward step back, his words sharp and cutting, yet none of it reached Ward's ears. All he heard was the slow breathing of the creature. All he felt was the warmth of its gaze, something ancient and heavy, something that told him this was no accident. This was not hunger. This was not fear. This was choice. Then it happened. The alarm screeched, the energy barrier flickered, sparks burst from the control panel, wires hissed and burned, and the cage door groaned open with a sound that tore into every heart in the room, metal grinding against metal, bolts snapping free. The guards shouted, weapons lit with deadly fire. Scientists scrambled back in terror, and the commander roared for the beast to be destroyed before it tore them all apart. The cub stepped forward, slow and steady. Its claws clicked against the floor. Its shadow stretched across the white tiles, and for a moment time seemed frozen. Every eye locked on the young predator as it crossed the line of its prison. Free now. Dangerous. Death embodied in a small form that moved with silent grace. Ward did not run. He could not. His feet refused. His breath caught in his chest. He stood frozen as the cub came closer. One step, then another, its muscles tense, its eyes burning, and all around weapons hummed with energy ready to fire. One wrong move, and the chamber would explode with death. The cub stopped before him, so close he could feel its breath against his skin, hot and sharp like fire. Its nose lifted, sniffing the air, its eyes locked into his, and for a heartbeat Ward thought it would leap, thought his throat would be torn open, thought the end had come. But instead the cub lowered itself, curling its body at his feet, head resting against his leg, a rumble deep in its chest like distant thunder rolling across valleys. The room fell into silence, the kind of silence that crushes the soul. No one spoke, no one moved. Weapons trembled in hands now unsure. Scientists stared with wide eyes, and the commander's mouth hung open though no words came. The impossible had happened. The predator had chosen the human, chosen not with rage but with something far older, something that none of them understood. Ward slowly lowered his hand, trembling. He touched the soft fur along the cub's head, its body warm against his, its breathing calm, and he felt a bond like a current flowing into his skin, a spark that told him this was more than instinct, more than chance. This was connection, a joining of two paths that should never have met, yet now would never part. The commander finally found his voice. He barked orders again, shouted of danger, warned that if the cub bonded with the human none of them could control it, that it would bring doom upon the station, that they had to act before it was too late. His words cut through the silence like blades, and fear spread again, though now it was mixed with awe. The guards raised their weapons once more, their fingers trembling, their eyes shifting between the cub and the man it had chosen, and Ward felt the weight of every gaze upon him. He knew in that moment that one command could fill the air with fire and blood, yet he also knew the cub would not let him fall. He saw it in the way it pressed closer, in the way it growled low when the weapons hummed, in the way it trusted him against all reason. The tension grew thicker, every breath heavy, every second stretched like eternity, and the chamber was no longer filled with machines and walls. It was filled with fate itself, fate staring from glowing eyes, fate rumbling in the chest of a beast that should have been his killer, fate pressing into the heart of a man who had only wanted to study stars and numbers, now caught in a bond written in fire and shadow. And as the blue lights flickered across the steel walls, as fear and wonder twisted together, Ward knew this was only the beginning, for the cub had made its choice, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The chamber held its breath, guards frozen with weapons raised, scientists trembling with disbelief, the commander standing like stone with fury burning in his eyes, and in the middle of it all the predator cub curled its body at the human's feet, head pressed gently against Ward's leg, its body rumbling with a sound that was not rage, but something soft and deep, something that felt almost like trust, almost like belonging. Ward felt his heart hammer against his ribs, every beat echoing in his ears. He looked down at the creature that should have torn him apart, yet instead it rested on him, as if he was its shelter, as if the human presence was safer than the cage, safer than the weapons, safer than the entire fortress of steel around them. He slowly lowered his hand to its head, his fingers shaking as they brushed the soft fur, and the cub leaned into the touch with a slow purr that carried through the silent room like thunder wrapped in calm. The guards shifted nervously, their weapons humming, their eyes wide, and one of them whispered that the human was in danger, that the beast was waiting for its strike. But another shook his head, saying, "No, look at it. The predator is not hunting. The predator is protecting." The commander snarled at them to be silent, his jaw tight with anger, his mind racing with fear, for he had seen wars and monsters, but never had he seen one of the galaxy's most feared killers bow its head to a man. The scientists argued in hushed voices. Some spoke of instinct, some of hidden control, some of lost myths, but all were shaken. One alien whispered that ancient records told of predators choosing warriors, a bond written in blood and history, that when such a bond was formed nothing could break it, not chains, not weapons, not even death. And though most dismissed it as legend, the sight before them made their words feel heavy with truth. Ward heard none of it. His ears were filled with the low hum of the cub's breath. His hands felt the weight of its trust, and he could not bring himself to push it away. He knew he should. The commander was right. This was dangerous beyond reason, but something inside told him if he broke this bond now, he would lose more than the cub. He would lose something written deep into fate itself. And so he sat down slowly upon the cold floor, letting the cub crawl fully into his lap, curling tightly against his chest, purring with a sound that rolled like distant storms across mountains. Gasps filled the chamber. Weapons trembled and hands no longer sure whether to fire or to lower, and the commander's voice thundered with command, demanding Ward step away, demanding the beast be sedated or destroyed. His voice was iron, but the weight of the moment cracked through it, for no one dared fire. No one dared break what they saw. Even the most fearful guard hesitated, because deep down they knew this was not only danger. This was also something holy, something rare, something bigger than all of them. The cub pressed its head against Ward's chest, its claws retracting, its body sinking deeper into rest, and Ward felt warmth radiate from it, a warmth that spread into him, calming the storm in his mind. He whispered softly without thinking, words simple and quiet, telling the cub it was safe, that it was not alone, and though the creature did not know the language, it seemed to understand. Its rumbling grew louder, its body more relaxed, and for the first time since capture it closed its glowing eyes and drifted into rest. The commander paced like a beast trapped in his own cage, his boots striking sparks from the steel floor, his fists clenched. He shouted that this was unacceptable, that if the cub bonded with the human it would mean the end of control, that humans already bent rules of war, and now if this predator aligned with them, then no wall, no fleet, no empire would stand. He shouted to end it now, to fire before it was too late, his voice cutting through the air like blades. Yet no one moved. The guards looked to one another with uncertainty, their hands sweating upon weapons. The scientists shook their heads, unwilling to destroy what might be the greatest discovery of their time, and in that hesitation the bond grew stronger, for the cub stirred in Ward's arms each time the commander shouted, its ears twitching, its teeth flashing in warning. Yet when Ward whispered calm, it pressed close again, choosing trust over fury, choosing the human over all else. Ward lifted his head, his eyes meeting the commander's, and in that silent exchange he spoke without words. His gaze said he would not move, he would not betray the creature's trust, and he would not allow harm to come to it. The commander snarled back, his rage boiling, but even he knew that firing now could doom them all, for if the cub was harmed the adults might sense it. They might already be near, they might already be watching, and if they felt their young die here, then the station would not survive a single night. The room grew tense again, silence hanging heavy, broken only by the soft purr of the cub and the sharp breath of those who feared what they saw. Then a scientist stepped forward, voice shaking but words steady, saying perhaps the cub had chosen. Perhaps they were watching something that could not be undone. Perhaps it was safer to let the bond live than to break it and face the wrath of the species. Their words hung in the air like smoke, and though the commander spat in anger, he could not erase the fear behind them. Ward stroked the cub's head slowly, his hand gentle, his voice soft, his heart still pounding yet steadier now. He felt the strange power of the moment, the weight of history pressing on his shoulders. He thought of the myths whispered by explorers, of predators bowing to chosen ones, of warriors walking side by side with death itself. And though he had never believed them before, now with the warmth of the cub against his chest, he believed. He believed more deeply than anything in his life. The lights of the chamber flickered, machines humming like restless ghosts, the air thick with unease, and still the cub remained curled in his lap, trusting, resting, bound not by chains but by choice. And the longer it stayed, the more every alien in the room knew the truth, that no force could break it now. The predator had chosen the human, and the galaxy would feel the tremor of that choice. The commander finally stopped pacing, his voice low and bitter. He said this bond would not end well. He said the station was no place for such danger. He said if the cub lived, then soon the adults would come, and when they came none of them would survive. His words were sharp, but even he knew they were only shadows of fear, for deep down he understood the truth too. This bond was beyond his command, beyond his weapons, beyond his laws. Ward sat still, the cub breathing softly against him, the room silent except for that sound, and in his heart he felt the path ahead, dangerous and dark, filled with storms he could not yet see, yet also filled with something new, something alive, something that gave meaning to his existence in the cold stars. He felt destiny whisper through the heartbeat of the predator against his chest, and he knew whatever came next would change everything. The station moved through the silent orbit of the green moon, yet inside its walls the air grew heavier each day after the capture, for the predator cub had refused all things except the human, and what began as confusion soon became fear mixed with awe, for the young creature showed a will stronger than steel and a choice no one could break. Every morning the guards carried trays of raw meat and set them near the cage, yet the cub did not move. It only turned its head away, its glowing eyes searching for Ward. And when Ward entered the chamber, the cub rose instantly, pressing against the bars and letting out a soft rumble, low and steady. And only then, when the human spoke, did the cub eat a little, as if it needed his voice to guide each breath. The scientists gathered around, recording every movement and scribbling notes. With shaking hands they spoke of instinct, they spoke of ancient myths, they spoke of danger, yet all their words could not hide their trembling, for none of them had ever seen such a bond that seemed to grow stronger each moment, and the cub that once had roared with fury now curled into calm whenever the human stood near. Ward himself felt torn within, for he had joined the station to study stars and to map unknown worlds, not to face legends of blood and death, yet the cub's trust weighed on him like gravity. He could not escape its eyes, its warmth, its choice, and though part of him wished to step away, to hand the creature over to chains and weapons, another part stronger and deeper whispered that to break this bond would be to break himself. The commander grew restless, his patience thin, his voice thundered in every meeting that the cub must be sedated or destroyed before its kin arrived. He spoke of danger, of doom, of war waiting beyond the stars, but no one dared move against the creature, now, not while it pressed against Ward like a shadow that would not leave. For even the hardest soldier hesitated at the thought of killing something that had chosen loyalty over rage. One night the station shook with a strange sound, faint at first like claws scratching against the hull. The guards rushed to the outer deck. Sensors flared with warnings, and red lights painted the halls. The scientists huddled in fear, whispering that the adults had come, that the cub had called to them across the void, yet no signal had been sent, no beacon lit, and still the scratching grew louder like knives across glass. Inside the lab the cub growled for the first time in days, a deep rolling sound that echoed through the walls. It stood at the bars, teeth bared, eyes blazing, and Ward felt its body tense with fury. Yet he saw not only rage, he saw fear trembling under the growl, the kind of fear that comes when one knows death is near, and Ward realized then the cub was not the hunter tonight, it was the hunted. The commander stormed in his armor, shining under red light, his face set in stone. He barked orders to prepare for siege. He declared the cub had betrayed them, that it had led its kind to the station, and that they must kill it before the doors fell. He raised his weapon ready to fire, but in that instant the cub let out a roar, so sharp it shattered glass across the chamber, and it pressed against Ward, as if begging him not to leave, not to let harm come. Ward stepped forward, standing between the cub and the commander, his voice firm though his chest pounded. He said the cub had not betrayed them, it had bonded, it had chosen, and killing it would only draw the fury of the adults closer. He begged the commander to wait, to think, to see that the cub was not their enemy, but their only chance of survival. The commander's eyes burned with doubt, yet also with fear, and he lowered his weapon though his voice remained sharp with warning. Outside the wall sensors screamed more life forms moving closer, shadows sliding across the hull like waves of darkness. The guards whispered of shapes with claws larger than ships, of eyes glowing in the void, and the station shuddered again under the weight of something vast, scratching, testing, seeking the cub, trembled, pressing against Ward, growling softer. Now its eyes locked on the door, as if waiting for the storm to break through. The scientists panicked, some begged to release the cub, hoping its kin would spare them, others cried to destroy it, to show strength. Yet Ward held it tighter, whispering calm, though his own heart shook. He felt the bond stronger, now more alive than before. The cub pressed its head into his chest, its purr returning the weaker, and he knew, without doubt, it had chosen him over its species. It would stand with him even against its own blood. The commander gave orders for all defenses to be raised. The base filled with the hum of cannons and the roar of energy shields. The halls glowed red with warning light, and the sound of claws against steel grew louder with every breath. The guards sweated under helmets. The scientists prayed in silence, and Ward stood in the lab with the cub at his side, his hand resting on its fur, feeling the heartbeat that seemed to echo his own. Hours stretched like days. The shadows outside circled the station, testing every wall, every shield, every barrier. Yet they did not strike. They waited, as if listening, as if searching, and Ward wondered if they could sense the choice made inside, if they could feel the bond between cub and human, and if so, then perhaps they did not attack, because they were unsure. Perhaps they too waited to see what path the young one had chosen. Yet patience is not eternal, and as the night deepened, the strikes came heavy and hard, shaking the station to its core. Walls groaned, shields flared, sparks rained from the ceiling, and the sound of howls carried through the void, chilling every soul. Within, the cub growled louder, pressing close to Ward, its claws carving lines into the floor, not in rage, but in warning, and the commander declared the time had come. The battle had found them. Ward looked into the cub's eyes, glowing bright against the flickering lights. He saw fear, he saw loyalty, he saw a choice already made. He whispered softly that they would face it together, that no matter what came, he would not leave it, and the cub answered with a rumble, deep and steady, pressing its body against him, as if sealing the vow. The walls shook again, metal tearing like cloth. The outer alarm screamed as claws ripped into steel. The commander shouted for weapons to fire. The guards readied their cannons. The scientists fled to the inner halls, and Ward stood with the cub by his side, heart heavy but steady, knowing that this was no longer just research, no longer just survival. This was fate unfolding before their eyes. And as the shadows closed around the station, as the roars of the adults thundered through the void, as the steel doors bent under the weight of predators older and stronger, Ward knew the bond was not only real, it was the only hope they had, for the cub had chosen him, and through that choice, perhaps the storm could be faced, perhaps the bond could hold, perhaps even death itself could be defied. The night around the station was darker than any night known to man or aliens, for the stars themselves seemed to hide behind clouds of shadow as the predators came closer, their shapes circling the station like vultures around dying prey, their claws scraping metal, their howls cutting through the void like blades of thunder, and every soul within the walls felt the truth that death had arrived. The alarm screamed with red light, painting the halls in blood. The guards rushed to their stations, cannons charging, shields humming with unstable power. The scientists fled deeper into the core, their voices crying, their hands trembling as they carried datapads that now felt worthless, for no knowledge could stop what came. The commander stood tall in the war chamber, his armor gleaming under the glow of desperate screens, his voice roaring commands like fire. Yet beneath his rage there was fear, for he had never faced this foe, and even he knew the walls might not hold. In the lab, Ward held the cub close, its growl rumbling like storm clouds trapped in a cage, its eyes locked on the sealed doors that shook under every strike. And though the creature trembled, its body pressed against him, as if his presence alone was a shield, as if his breath alone was the fire that gave it courage. He whispered to it softly, promising it was not alone, promising he would not leave. And the cub answered, not with words, but with the steady press of its heart against his chest. The first strike came like a quake, claws tearing through outer plating, alarms shrieking louder as sparks rained from the ceiling. The commander shouted orders to fire, and the station's cannons unleashed rivers of light that burned across the void, striking shadows that twisted and roared. Yet for every shape torn apart, more came crawling through the darkness, their eyes glowing, their teeth flashing. The void filled with their cries, and the station shook again under the weight of endless fury. The guards fired until their arms ached, their eyes stinging from smoke, their hearts racing as they watched the shields flicker with every blow. The scientists huddled in silence, whispering prayers to gods that had never answered before, and the commander shouted to hold the line, his voice fierce though his hands shook behind clenched fists. He told them the cub was to blame, that if it had not been captured the adults would not have come, that if it died the siege might end, and his words filled the chamber like poison, stirring anger and doubt. Ward heard him through the walls, his voice carried through the speakers, and the cub growled at the sound, its teeth flashing, its body pressing harder against Ward, as if knowing the commander wanted its blood. Ward held it tighter, whispering again that he would not allow it, whispering that whatever storm waited outside they would face it together, and the cub's growl softened into a deep rumble of trust. The strikes grew heavier, the walls groaned with each blow, metal bending, shields cracking, sparks flying like falling stars through the halls. The guards staggered under the shock waves, their ears ringing, their armor rattling. The commander roared louder, demanding more fire, demanding no retreat. But fear crept into the hearts of many, for they knew the walls would not last forever, and whispers spread that perhaps the human was right, perhaps killing the cub would only make things worse for the adults. already roared with fury. Imagine their rage if their young was slaughtered. Ward stood in the lab with the cub by his side, the air thick with smoke, and fear the sound of claws tearing steel echoing like drums of war. The cub snarled at each sound, its body trembling not from weakness, but from the storm of choice raging within, for though it was of their blood, it pressed closer to the human, its trust unbroken. And Ward saw the truth in its eyes, the truth that it had chosen him above all else. The commander stormed into the lab, his armor covered in dust, his face carved with fury, his weapon raised. He shouted that it must end here, that the cub must die now, before the doors broke, that only then would the adults retreat. He raised his weapon toward the creature, his eyes burning with desperate rage. Yet before he could fire, the cub leapt forward, standing between him and Ward, its growl splitting the air, its teeth flashing, its claws digging into the floor as if ready to tear through steel itself. Ward stepped beside it, his own body a shield, his voice strong though his heart thundered. He told the commander, no, he told him the cub was not their enemy. He told him that the bond was their only hope. The commander cursed him, calling him blind, calling him traitor, calling him a fool who would doom them all. And for a moment the chamber was filled with nothing but rage and fear, and the hum of weapons ready to burn. But then the walls shook harder than before, the outer doors bent under the weight of claws, the sound of tearing steel filled the air, and through the crack of light they saw eyes glowing red like fire. In endless night the adults had come closer, their roars flooding the chamber, louder than storms, louder than war drums, louder than anything they had ever known. The cub snarled louder, pressing against Ward, its body trembling, yet strong, its heart pounding like a drum of fate. And Ward whispered that it was not alone, that together they would endure. The commander hesitated, his weapon still raised, his eyes torn between fear and fury, and in that hesitation the choice was made. The cub pressed against the human with a growl of defiance. The guards lowered their weapons, uncertain. The scientists whispered that perhaps this was destiny, and the commander spat in anger, but still did not fire, for he knew if he killed it now, and the adults felt its death, then the station would be nothing but ashes within moments. The siege grew worse, the station groaning under each strike, the shields failing, sparks bursting, fire licking along the halls, alarms screaming into the void. The commander shouted once more to hold the line, his voice raw, his anger sharp, but the guards no longer shouted back with the same strength. Their eyes lingered on Ward and the cub, their hearts torn between fear and wonder, between duty and fate. Ward knelt beside the cub, stroking its fur, his voice calm though the world shook around him. He whispered that no matter what came next they would stand side by side, and the cub answered with a rumble deep as thunder, pressing its head against his chest. And in that moment, even as the walls cracked and fire rained, he felt the bond grow stronger, heavier, brighter than anything he had ever known. It was not only trust, it was not only choice, it was destiny. And as the outer doors finally cracked open, as the howls of the adults filled the chamber, as shadows moved through the smoke, and the air turned to fire, Ward stood with the cub, ready, his heart steady, his eyes fierce. And though the station shook, and the future was written in blood, he felt no fear, only the weight of the bond, and the certainty that whatever storm came next they would face it together. The station shook as the outer doors bent and cracked under the crushing weight of claws. The sound of tearing metal filled the air, and the lights flickered with each strike. Sparks rained from the ceiling, fire crawled along the walls, and the screams of alarms drowned every voice. Yet through the chaos, one sound rose clear, the growl of the predator cub, standing beside the human, its small body tense, its eyes blazing with fire as the storm closed in. The commander stood at the center of the chamber, his armor glowing under red light, his weapon raised, his voice thundering above the alarms. He declared that the cub must die here, and now that its life was the price of survival, that the adults would not stop until it was gone. And his words struck fear into many hearts. The guards lifted their weapons, the scientists whispered in panic, and all eyes turned to the human who stood with the cub pressed against his side. Ward felt the weight of the moment, heavy like chains pulling against his chest, his breath sharp, his hands trembling yet steady as they rested on the cub's head. He looked into its glowing eyes and saw fear, yes, but also loyalty and trust deeper than oceans. The cub growled at the commander, its teeth flashing, its claws digging into the steel floor, and Ward knew the choice was upon him. He could step aside, obey the commander, let the cub be slain, and perhaps save the station, or he could stand against them, protect the creature that had chosen him, and risk all lives within these walls. The commander roared again, ordering fire, demanding the human move, demanding obedience, his eyes sharp with rage, his finger ready on the trigger. The guards raised their weapons higher, their hands shaking, sweat dripping, fear thick as smoke in the air, and in that suspended moment time seemed to freeze. The alarm screamed, but felt distant. The fire burned, but felt cold, and Ward's heart pounded like a war drum, echoing louder than the storm outside. He stepped forward, placing himself between the cub and the commander. His voice cut through the chaos, calm but firm. He said no. He said the cub would not be killed. He said the bond was real, and their only hope. He said that killing it would not save them, but doom them, for the adults would sense its death, and nothing would stop their wrath. The commander's face twisted with fury. He shouted traitor, shouted fool, shouted that the human had chosen a beast over his own kind, and his weapon began to glow brighter, ready to fire. The cub pressed against Ward, its growl deeper, its body trembling, yet strong, its eyes fixed on the commander with a fire that no fear could quench. Ward lifted his own weapon, but not toward the cub, not toward the predators clawing outside, but toward the commander himself. The chamber gasped in disbelief. Guards hesitated, scientists froze. The commander's eyes widened in shock and rage, and the human's voice rang out once more, steady as stone. He said if the commander tried to harm the cub, then he would fight him to the end. The silence that followed was sharp as knives, broken only by the tearing steel of the outer doors. The shadows of adults sliding through the cracks, their eyes burning like fire across the smoke. The guards shifted, uncertain, their fingers trembling on triggers, torn between their commander's orders and the sight of the human and the cub standing as one. The scientists whispered that perhaps this was destiny, that perhaps the human was right, that killing the cub would only end them faster. And their whispers spread like sparks through dry grass, filling the air with doubt. The commander snarled, his voice like thunder. He ordered again to fire, to kill them both if needed, but no weapons fired. No guards obeyed. Their eyes shifted, their hands faltered, their fear outweighed his command, and in that moment of hesitation the outer doors burst apart, claws ripping through steel, fire flooding the hall. Shadows poured in, massive and terrible. The adults had arrived, their roars shaking the chamber, their eyes burning with hunger and fury. The siege had ended, the invasion had begun. The guards screamed, firing their weapons. The air filled with light and smoke. The walls trembled under the battle cries. The scientists fled deeper into the base, some tripping, some crying, some praying. The commander roared, charging forward, firing into the dark, his voice fierce, his body a blaze of desperate courage. And Ward stood unmoving, the cub at his side, its growl matching the thunder of the adults, its body pressed tight against him, its trust unbroken. The adults hesitated as they burst into the chamber, their glowing eyes falling upon the cub, their claws dripping with sparks from torn steel. Their roars shook the air, but faltered as they saw the young one, not chained, not broken, not dead, but standing beside the human. The cub growled at them, loud, fierce, defiant, its small body a wall between them and Ward and the adults. Paused, confusion rippling through their ranks, their eyes narrowing as if trying to understand. The commander shouted to fire again, demanding death, but the guards froze, their weapons lowered, their fear tangled with all. The scientists whispered louder, saying the cub had chosen, saying the bond was sealed, saying the adults would not kill their own. And Ward raised his voice, calling out into the chamber, calling that the cub was with him, that it had chosen him, that it would not return to them. And his voice echoed louder than the alarms, louder than the commander, louder even than the roars of the beasts. The adults shifted their weight, their claws scraping sparks, their eyes glowing hotter, their roars shaking the steel. Yet they did not strike. Not yet. They circled like storms around mountains, their power vast, their fury clear. But something held them back. The cub growled louder, pressing against Ward, its heart pounding like drums, its eyes burning like suns. And Ward knew they were waiting to see if the choice was true, if the cub would betray them or defend the human. The commander lifted his weapon again, aiming at the cub, his voice roaring that this madness must end now. But before he could fire, Ward's weapon lifted higher, his hands steady, his eyes burning with defiance. He told the commander once more that if he tried to kill the cub, then he would kill him first. Silence fell again, sharp and heavy, the guards staring wide, the scientists holding their breath, and even the adults paused, their eyes glowing brighter, watching the standoff with a strange intelligence. The cub pressed tighter against Ward, its growl like rolling thunder, and Ward whispered to it softly, promising once more that they would face the storm together, that he would never abandon it, that no matter what choice cost him, he had already made it. And the cub answered with a rumble deep as mountains, sealing the bond with sound and fire. and trust unbreakable. The commander's hand shook, his eyes wide, his weapon glowing, but unmoving, his soldiers, trembling, his scientists, whispering, his enemies circling, and in that moment the balance shifted for the first time. The human, not the commander, not the guards, not the scientists, stood as the center of fate, the bond between man and predator, shining brighter than fear, brighter than weapons, brighter than death itself. And as the walls burned and the adults roared and the commander's rage cracked beneath the weight of silence, Ward knew the choice was complete. He had chosen the cub had chosen him, and nothing could break it, not war, not claws, not even death waiting beyond the fire. The chamber shook like the heart of a dying world as the outer doors fell inward, torn apart by claws sharp as blades. The adults swarmed through shadows larger than machines, eyes burning with fire, teeth flashing like lightning, and their roars filled the station, louder than storms, louder than war drums, louder than every alarm that screamed in vain. The guards staggered back with their weapons, firing beams of light that struck the beasts, yet the predators pressed forward, their hides thick, their fury endless, and the air turned to smoke and thunder. The commander roared, charging into the fray, his armor glowing with energy, blasts, his weapon spitting fire, his body moving with desperate courage. Yet even he could not turn the tide, for every adult that staggered, two more came crashing through the breach, and the station itself groaned under their weight. The walls bent, the floor cracked, the ceiling rained sparks like burning stars, and the scientists fled deeper into the tunnels, their cries echoing like ghosts, vanishing into the smoke. In the center of chaos, Ward stood unmoving, the cub pressed tight against him, its growl deep and steady, its eyes locked on the giants that circled the chamber, and in that instant Ward felt no fear, for the bond that bound them was stronger than chains, stronger than death itself. He whispered softly to the cub words of promise, words of fire, saying they would stand together, and the cub answered with a roar that rolled across the chamber like thunder, cracking mountains. The adults froze, their eyes shifting to the young one, their massive claws digging into steel, their tails lashing with fury. They roared back louder, shaking the chamber with sound, yet still they hesitated, their eyes burning with confusion, for the cub did not cower, it did not crawl, it did not return to them. It pressed itself against the human, its growl defiant, its trust unbroken, and in that hesitation the bond shone brighter than fire. The commander turned, screaming that now was the time to strike, to kill them both before the adults tore the station apart, his weapon aimed at Ward, his eyes blazing with rage. Yet the guards did not move, their hands shook, their hearts pounded, their fear chained them, still their eyes fixed on the sight before them. The predator cub curled against a human, standing side by side against death itself, and in their silence Ward lifted his weapon, not at the beast, not at the guards, but at the commander. His voice steady as stone, he told him no. The commander roared, traitor, his rage spilling like blood, his weapon glowing brighter. Yet before he could fire, the cub leapt forward, snarling with savage fury, its body a storm of claws and teeth. It struck the ground between Ward and the commander, standing like a wall of fire. Its roar filled the chamber, so loud the walls rattled, and the adults outside faltered, their eyes narrowing, their voices falling into silence. And for the first time the predators paused, not from fear, but from something older, from recognition. Ward placed his hand on the cub's back, his eyes burning as he raised his weapon toward the shadows, his voice strong as he shouted into the chaos that they would fight together, that he would not surrender, that the bond was real and unbreakable, and his words carried across the chamber through fire and smoke, through fear and doubt, and even the predators listened, their glowing eyes fixed on the human who stood with one of their own. The battle exploded again, light and claws, fire and teeth. The guards fired their cannons, the predators struck with savage rage. The commander fought like a demon, his armor cracking under claws, yet still his weapon cut through flesh. The chamber shook like a dying star, and still Ward stood side by side with the cub, the two moving as one. The cub lunged with claws ripping through shadows. Ward fired with perfect aim, covering its flank, their movements flowing like rivers, like they had fought together 1,000 times, though they had only just begun. The scientists hiding in the tunnels watched through trembling screens, their eyes wide, their voices hushed, as they saw the impossible play before them, human and predator fighting as one, their strength doubled, their trust unbroken. And for the first time whispers spread that perhaps the myths were true, that perhaps bonds written in blood could shake empires and rewrite fate itself. The adults circled again, their eyes narrowing, their roars fading into silence. The cub stood before them, battered, Yet proud its fur torn, its breath heavy, yet still it pressed against Ward, never stepping away, never bowing. And the adults hesitated, their massive bodies, trembling, their claws digging deeper into the steel floor, as if unsure, as if torn between rage and recognition. And the silence grew heavier than thunder, filling the chamber until every heart waited for the choice to be made. Ward knelt beside the cub, his hand on its head, his voice, soft though the world burned around him. He whispered that it was not alone that he would fight until his last breath, that together they could face even the darkness of the stars. And the cub pressed its head against his chest, its eyes closing for a breath, its rumble deep as mountains, answering with trust that no death could break. The commander staggered, his armor broken, his weapon nearly empty, his face twisted with rage and disbelief. He shouted that this was madness, shouted that no beast could ever stand with man, shouted that Ward had doomed them all. Yet even as his voice thundered, none listened, for the truth was already clear. The adults had not struck the final blow. The cub had not abandoned the human. The bond was stronger than war. The adults lowered their claws, their roars fading into silence, their eyes glowing with fire, yet softened with something older, something that trembled like memory. They turned away slowly, their massive shadows retreating back into the void, their claws scraping against steel one final time, before silence fell heavy and deep. The siege had ended, not with slaughter, not with surrender, but with choice. Ward collapsed to his knees, his body weak, his hands trembling, his chest heaving. The cub curled against him, purring soft, though blood streaked its fur, though its body shook with exhaustion. Its trust never faltered, it pressed into him like the anchor of a ship against storms. And the chamber around them lay in ruin, smoke rising, sparks falling, steel bent, yet the bond remained unbroken. The guards lowered their weapons, their eyes wide, their voices hushed with awe. The scientists stepped forward slowly, whispering of legends, whispering of history, whispering that they had witnessed something the galaxy would never forget. The commander sank against the wall, his eyes filled with fury and defeat, his voice broken as he cursed the bond, as he cursed the human. Yet even he could not deny the truth, that the predators had retreated not because of weapons, not because of walls, but because of the bond between man and beast. Ward lifted his head, his eyes meeting the silent crowd, his voice calm though his heart thundered. He said the cub had chosen, and he had chosen too, and nothing would break it now. He said that the galaxy had changed this night, that nothing would be the same again. The guards bowed their heads in silence. The scientists nodded slowly. The commander turned his face away in bitter defeat, and the cub pressed closer, its body warm, its eyes glowing with trust. And as the smoke cleared and the silence spread across the broken chamber, Ward knew this was not the end, but only the beginning, for the bond that had saved them tonight would shake the stars tomorrow. And the cub that had once been a prisoner now sat as a guardian in his lap, its trust heavy as destiny, its presence brighter than any flame. And though storms waited beyond the horizon, though enemies lurked in shadows, Ward knew the bond would endure, unbroken, eternal, written in fire, written in blood, written in the heart of a predator and a human standing side by side against the galaxy.